It started as a joke, or at least that's what I thought. My wife Sarah had that mischievous smile, the kind that usually meant she was teasing. But this time the words she spoke carried a weight I hadn't anticipated. "Take my husband," she laughed, glancing at our younger neighbor Kyle. I froze, unsure whether to laugh along or question her sanity. Kyle, to my shock, didn't just chuckle or shrug. He smiled, a slow, knowing smile, and said, "Well, if you insist." We'd been married for 7 years, and Sarah had always had a playful streak. We laughed, teased, and pushed boundaries in harmless ways, or so I had thought. But there was something different in the air that night. A tension I hadn't felt before. Kyle was 25, confident, charming in that effortless way that made people feel at ease, and dangerously observant. He noticed things. He noticed everything. And I realized with a sinking feeling that he noticed me noticing him. The night began innocently enough. A small get-together in our apartment, some drinks, a few laughs. Friends came and went. But every glance Sarah threw at Kyle, every playful nudge, carried an undercurrent I couldn't ignore. First, I tried to dismiss it. "It's just a joke," I told myself. "She doesn't mean anything by it." But the jokes piled on, each one sharper, more daring, and each time Kyle responded in kind. By the time the evening was in full swing, I could feel the tension building like a storm cloud over our heads. The conversation shifted subtly, away from casual topics and into personal territory. Kyle asked questions, curious, probing, watching both of us with an intensity that made my chest tighten. Sarah's laughter was lighter, quicker, and I could feel her excitement growing. And then the moment came. She leaned in, whispering in his ear, and I caught every word. "You could have me tonight if you want." My heart sank. Not with jealousy exactly, but with a mixture of disbelief and shock. I had thought I knew my wife, thought I understood our marriage, thought we had boundaries. And yet, here was a line being crossed so deliberately, so effortlessly, that it made everything I had believed feel fragile. I didn't react immediately. Instead, I observed. I watched. And that's when I realized the truth. This wasn't about a joke anymore. This was about desire, about curiosity, about a thrill neither of them could resist. The room felt smaller all of a sudden, the laughter and music fading into the background as my mind raced. Every instinct screamed at me. Anger, disbelief, confusion, but I forced myself to stay calm. I had seen enough in life to know that reactions born from shock rarely end well. Instead, I chose to watch, to let the events unfold, to understand the full extent of what Sarah and Kyle were doing before I decided my next move. Kyle leaned closer, his hand brushing hers ever so slightly, testing boundaries. Sarah responded in kind, her eyes sparkling with mischief and something more, a hint of rebellion that made my stomach twist. I thought back to our years together, to the promises we had made, to the trust we had built. And I realized how fragile that trust could be when exposed to temptation, to curiosity, to someone who knows exactly what buttons to push. The other guests didn't notice at first. They were engaged in their own conversations, oblivious to the tension simmering between the three of us. But subtle signals began to emerge, stolen glances, lingering touches, the way Sarah's laughter changed when Kyle spoke. It was a delicate dance, a game of control and temptation that I had been unwillingly drawn into. And yet, even as I felt my chest tighten with discomfort, I couldn't tear my eyes away. Then came the moment that changed everything. Sarah whispered something in Kyle's ear. A dare? A challenge? An invitation I wasn't sure I wanted to understand. Kyle smiled, a slow, deliberate smile, and reached for her hand. The energy between them was electric, a dangerous current I could feel from across the room. I realized in that instant that the joke had ended. The thrill had turned real, and I was no longer a bystander. I was part of a story being written without my consent. I could feel my hands clench into fists, not out of rage but out of sheer disbelief. Sarah had crossed a line, one that I hadn't even known existed until this night. And yet, as terrifying as it was, there was also a clarity that came with watching the truth reveal itself in real time. Kyle wasn't afraid, Sarah wasn't hiding. Everything I had assumed, every illusion I had built about our marriage, was being stripped away piece by piece. By the time the evening wound down, I understood one undeniable fact. This wasn't just a moment of foolish fun. This was an awakening, a brutal, uncompromising exposure of desires, boundaries, and truths that could no longer be ignored. And as I excused myself from the gathering, I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The next morning the apartment was quiet, almost eerily so. Sarah had returned to her usual routine, pretending that nothing had happened, that last night's tension was just a figment of my imagination. But I knew better. I could feel it in the air, in the way she avoided my gaze, in the subtle hesitation in her voice. Kyle had gone back to his own apartment, but the impact of their interaction lingered like a shadow, impossible to ignore. I sat at the kitchen table, coffee in hand, replaying the events in my mind. Each glance, each whisper, each playful nudge now carried weight, meaning and intent I hadn't fully appreciated until it was too late. Sarah's joke, once harmless in my eyes, had become the spark for something far more serious, a breach of trust that shook me to my core. And yet, despite the betrayal, I felt a strange clarity settle over me. I could see the patterns, the choices, the consequences of actions taken without consideration for the people they affect. Later that day, I confronted her, not with anger, not with accusations, but with questions that demanded honesty. "Sarah," I began, my voice steady, "what happened last night? Did you mean it? Or was it just a joke?" She looked at me, her eyes darting, hesitation clear. I could see the conflict in her expression, the thrill of rebellion, the guilt, the awareness that she had gone further than even she had intended. Her words were hesitant, fragmented, a mixture of truth and deflection. She admitted the flirtation, the subtle games, the way she had let Kyle into our world, even if only for a moment. And in that admission, the full scope of the betrayal became undeniable. It wasn't just about temptation or curiosity. It was about the boundaries she had willingly crossed, the trust she had shattered, and the illusion of our life together that had been built on careful compromise and unspoken agreements. I didn't yell. I didn't storm out. I simply listened, letting the gravity of the situation sink in. And as I did, I realized something essential. Trust, once broken, cannot be casually repaired. The joke, the flirtation, the reckless disregard for what was sacred between us, these were not minor missteps. They were seismic cracks in the foundation of our marriage. By the end of that day, I had made a decision. Not out of spite, not out of revenge, but out of clarity. The marriage I had believed in, the life I had worked to build, could no longer exist in the same form. Sarah's joke, which had seemed trivial in the moment, had blown everything apart. And as I stepped into the night, leaving behind the echoes of laughter, temptation, and betrayal, I knew that some lines once crossed cannot be uncrossed, and that freedom, clarity, and self-respect often come at the highest cost.